It's Hugh Hewitt. It's doubly the most wonderful time of the year because not only do we have Christmas, we have an election, a general election in the United Kingdom, which is just, crack cocaine for the politically addicted. And we have as our guide through the ups and downs of the campaign, Matthew Elliott, one of the brains behind the Leave campaign, now the editor at large of BrexitCentral.com and a consultant to many fine, smart people throughout the United Kingdom. Good morning, Matthew. Happy December to you.
Good morning, Hugh, and happy Thanksgiving if it's not too late.
Years ago, I took the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I said, a Dickens Christmas sounds wonderful to me. Let's go to London in December and experience a Dickens Christmas. It was the most miserable weather we've ever had on a vacation. We were frozen head to toe. This was all false advertising by Dickens.
The trouble is the snow tends to come in sort of late January, February. So December tends to be rain and dark and miserable.
That is exactly what it was. So how goes an election in the rainy, dark, miserable December?
Well, it's been quite tough on the campaigners when it comes to things like door-to-door canvassing. It's quite tough for them. But what's really interesting is how Facebook advertising is now bigger than ever in this campaign. And we're starting to see all of the parties now splurge a lot of money over the final 10 days of the campaign on their Facebook ads. So we'll see how that changes the race. But at the moment, things look pretty good for Boris. He's still got his lead. It still looks like he'll get a majority, but things definitely are tightening.
Now, I was looking this morning at the Telegraph's pipeline of news, and they put Boriss up a couple of points, Labour up a couple of points, but still a double-digit lead for the Tories. I've read other polls that say it's down to 6. What's your sense of the situation, Matthew Elliott?
Well, there's certainly a big spread. As you say, at the bottom end, you have leads of 6%. At the top end, there was one yesterday saying a 13% lead. Now, the big guru in polling in the UK is Professor John Curtis, and he's adamant that so long as the lead is 6% or more, then Boris will get a majority. So all of the polls are pointing towards the majority at the moment. But two factors will be keeping people in the Conservative Party up at night. They are, first of all, the prevalence of tactical voting. There's indications that people will be voting on a tactical basis in certain seats. So, for example, the Foreign Secretary, Dom Raab, is facing an opposition from the Liberal Democrats. And you get Alistair Campbell, who used to work for Tony Blair, telling Labour voters in Esher, his seat, to vote Lib Dem. So that tactical voting will be big. And the other big question is, there are 23% of voters who are undecided at the moment, according to the latest YouGov poll. Now, how many of those voters are not undecided, but actually perhaps shy Labour voters? I've got a feeling that because Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, is so terrible, there might be a shy Labour voter factor out there that could kick in on voting day and could see their numbers polling higher than the polling suggests.
Now, Matthew Elliott, I was watching with the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt last night, the first installment in the third season of The Crown, when Harold Wilson becomes the prime minister. And I was thinking to myself, Harold Wilson is sort of like an old Democrat in the United States, so different from Jeremy Corbyn. The Labour Party isn't what it was when Winston Churchill was alive and worried about its drift to the left. It's actually gone over the cliff.
You're absolutely right on that. It really is a hard left Marxist party now. And when the Conservatives say that, it's not an insult. They are literally along those lines. And actually, Jeremy Corbyn and his Chancellor, John McDonnell, would actually wear that with a badge of pride. They love that fact. And just today in the headlines, the Labour Party has announced that they want to cut rail fares by a third, and they want to give free rail fares for under 16-year-olds. Again, this wasn't in their manifesto. There's no indication of how they're going to pay for this. So what we're going to see in the final 10 days of the campaign is the Labour Party saying even more things will be free from the government. Now, I am actually quite confident that voters won't be fooled by this. Voters are actually quite smart. There's a poll last week that suggested that only, I think it was 17% of people thought that the Labour Party's proposals were achievable and affordable. So actually, I think voters can see through these promises. But there's always that worry in the back of my mind. Will they be fooled by it? Will they inch towards Labour on polling day, or will some Labour voters who need to vote for Boris to get him in actually stay at home?
Now, Matthew Elliott, I have to apologize. I ought to have begun this segment by recognizing the terror attack on London Bridge, the loss of 2 valiant Britons, the wounding of others, the bravery of the 3 men who stopped the terrorists. I ought to have said that, but 2 days in the news cycle is an endless amount, and unfortunately, we're becoming used to this, especially on the bridges in the downtown of London. What is its impact, if any, on a general election, and what has it done to the mood of the country?
You're right. Things do move on very quickly now, and in the UK news cycle as well, there was a slight pause whilst all the politicians paid their respects. But by Sunday, it has really been charged as a political issue, and both sides were blaming each other. The Labour Party saying, well, you've been in power for 10 years, it's your issue. The Conservative Party saying, well, he was charged under your sentencing regime, it's your issue. So really it is a party political issue now. How it will play out is anybody's guess. But I've got a feeling that when voters consider who would they rather have as Home Secretary looking after national security, would they rather have Priti Patel or Diane Abbott? I know the vast majority will want to go for Priti Patel. So I think, if anything, in political terms, it will help the Conservative Party, particularly because Jeremy Corbyn, even in his own words this weekend in his interviews on the Sunday talk shows, he is weak on security. He is happy to allow terrorists to be released from prison before they finish their full terms in jail. So he's pretty weak on this. I think it should actually help the Conservatives overall.
Matthew Elliott, can you explain who Priti Patel is, and do so in the context of a Tory cabinet, including Sajid Javid and many other, that is as diverse as any British cabinet I've ever seen?
Very much so. So Priti Patel has been a Conservative Member of Parliament, I think from memory, since 2005. Her family came to the UK in the, I'm guessing, the 1970s. They were from Uganda, so part of the Ugandan Asian community who had to flee as refugees, and Britain accepted them as refugees in the UK. Sajid Javid, a similar story. I worked very closely with him early this year, co-chairing his leadership election campaign, and his family came to the UK again in the 1970s from Pakistan. His grandfather was $1 a day farmer in Pakistan, and now they came to the UK. His mum and dad ran a shop in various parts of the country, in a market stall. He then went to university. He became the youngest ever vice president of JP Morgan. Did very well professionally before going to politics. And Rishi Sunak, who's been representing the Conservative Party in many debates this time round, he's the deputy to Sajid in the Treasury, and he's the chief secretary of the Treasury. Again, he comes from an ethnic minority background. And what it shows is that actually the Conservative Party doesn't need to have quotas to have female leaders, doesn't need to have quotas to have ethnic minority candidates, to have people at the very top of the party from ethnic minority backgrounds. We recognise merit. We promote people on the basis of meritocracy, and all 3 of them are doing absolutely superb jobs in their various departments, and I'm sure will rise even higher in the years to come.
Matthew Elliott, I want to close by talking about British media. In the United States,
Yes.
Manhattan Beltway elite media is now viewed not as an objective observer, but as a participant, as an arm generally, almost overwhelmingly, of the Democratic Party. After watching the Andrew Marr attack on Boris Johnson yesterday, I'm coming to the conclusion, and I think that was fueled by his desire to please his peers, that the British media has gone the same way generally. There will be exceptions to that rule, but am I right that the media itself may become an issue in the minds of the British electorate?
Well, newspapers are definitely partisan and split into, there are 2 which are basically more Labour, and then a lot of them are more sort of pro-Conservative this time around. But broadcasters, you're right, there are whole questions about impartiality this time around. One key difference between the UK and the US having debates is quite a new thing in UK elections. It only really came in the 2010 general election. So it's a very new thing. And I think next time around, there might need to be a debate commission to oversee the debates on all the broadcasters. There's been some questions about the fairness of it, and some people signing up to certain debates and not wanting to do others. So I think that role will be formalised in the next general election to, again, make it a bit more partial. But, again, the key questions to be asked, not just by the BBC, but also there's a channel called Channel 4, which, again, is subsidised by the taxpayer largely, but they are very, very left-wing, and I think quite rightly the Conservative Party are boycotting it at the moment and not placing guests on their shows.
You know, I do believe you're going to go in the direction we went in 2016, where the parties themselves control and the broadcasters do not. Let me close by asking you about the energy level of the Prime Minister, because it matters so much that you have a closing kick, as they say in track and field. Does he have a closing kick?
I think he does. Of course, you've got a very tough 10 days coming up, not least because this week is the NATO summit in the UK, and President Trump will be arriving here this evening and will be in London until Wednesday evening. So he's seeing lots of different heads of government and heads of state over the next few days as they celebrate 70 years of NATO. So that will take a lot of bandwidth. Of course, there's the whole bandwidth covering the aftermath of the terror attack on Friday. Again, there'll be meetings with Cobra. That will be taking a lot of his time. He will possibly have an interview with Andrew Neil, the sort of fiercest presenter on TV, on BBC TV, later on this week. And then, of course, the final stretch of the campaign. The one thing I know, having campaigned with Boriss during the EU referendum, is he has a sixth and seventh gear, and he has boundless energy, boundless positivity, and I know he won't be flagging the final stretch of the campaign.
Matthew Elliott, always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Matthew_Elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's, and at Brexit Central. Thank you, Matthew. Time for me to remind you for